I'm a bit of a history buff, especially for American history. And I love the Kennedy administration in the Cold War period especially. And I was reading a brilliant biography that Robert Dallek wrote, An Unfinished Life. And in the section about Cuba, there was a story about this guy called James Donovan who had been sent to Cuba to negotiate for the release of 1,500 servicemen that had been caught after the Bay of Pigs. And in the book, there was a little footnote right at the bottom that said, Donovan came to prominence for arranging a spy swap between Rudolph Abel and an American pilot, Gary Powers. It was just a tiny little mention, and I just thought, this is crazy. Who is this guy? Like, JFK sent him to negotiate with Castro. Prior to that, he's done a spy swap. I've never heard of this man. Who is he? And I started to piece together through the New York Times archive and through the Kennedy Presidential Library, various different sources, and realized that this was a remarkable story that had never been told of a really incredible hero, you know, an American hero that just had gone kind of unnoticed.
Tom Hanks is extraordinary in the film, and he's very recessive, isn't he, Steven? He very much uses sort of his every guy-ness to his advantage in these negotiations.
He's probably, for me anyway, less every guy in this movie than he has been in many of the movies he's made before. And I always say that because there's something, knowing Tom as well as I do, there's something about this character that Tom really respected, and the fact that, you know, he was going to be a badass. And when Tom saw the movie, he called me up. I wasn't with him when he saw it. He saw my cut, my director's cut. And he said, wow, I can't believe how badass I am in this movie. And he said, I'd never been badass before. Maybe a little bit in Road to Perdition, but no, Donovan's really a badass. And I think he was saying that because he presented such focused arguments, and his arguments were all reasonable. You know, the whole 2-for-1 argument. I guess he'd like to do things in multiples because he got 9,000 people out of Cuba. He was only supposed to get 1,500. But I just found Tom to really find this guy very quickly. And the very first thing we shot in the movie is the first scene that Tom appears in. That was our first day of shooting with Tom, where as an insurance, you know, representing the insurance company, he's trying to settle a case and not have the case, you know, reopened to make more settlements. So he's not the nicest guy in the world, and he's in an occupation which is a little bit questionable, anyway. And as he starts the scene, when we finished shooting that day, Tom said, "I know who James Donovan is," and for him, that was the precedent that informed him how to play James Donovan.
We shot half the movie here in New York, and then half the movie in Germany, nominally, but you know, East Berlin of the early 1960s isn't around anymore. When you walk around Berlin, it's kind of changed a bit. So we went actually further afield and went into Poland, and there's a town in western Poland that really provided kind of the backbone for the East Berlin sections of the film. And so finding that was a bit of an exploration, and then once we kind of locked in on that, that was really the key to the whole thing, and then we worked backwards into everything else.
What was some of your costume design choices in making sure that Tom and the rest of the film kind of fit a piece?
The direction and the script were so clear and so precise, and we had so much incredible research, photographic research, that I felt my job was fairly easy, other than organizational, how to represent that reality. We attacked the research ferociously. That was the biggest challenge, to gather all the pieces, and then to construct teams in all the countries where we were filming and prepare all the materials. We fed very much from reality, and as all the pieces of the film were coming together, it was so much driven by reality and resonated reality that my job was just to fit within the frame and not to be a bit bigger than what it called for.
Let's talk about the production design of the bridge itself and Checkpoint Charlie, which I have always long romanticized Checkpoint Charlie, but there's also a simplicity to Checkpoint Charlie. It wasn't this big, amazing place. It was sort of just this little street, few shops on the sides, right?
I mean, really, it's a little white guard shack in the middle of a road, and that's what it is. But the images of it are very iconic, and so we try to pull the really important things: the sign that says "No Stir" and the sign, the Pelican Ink sign, and and get the places that were really there in the right positions so that they kind of show up in the photographs the same way, so you have your memory is triggered of it. But yeah, it's a guard shack in a road. Really, I mean that's what it is.
And what about the bridge itself?
Well, the bridge is the bridge. I mean, we went there and it's still standing, and it is amazingly right near Babelsberg, which was where our construction base was, and so we were building all this stuff and bringing it right out to the bridge, and it's as if we had planned that, but it was just an incredible accident that it was that way. But it was great to be on the actual spot where this event occurred. It was a pretty special thing.
And the bridge still has the line right down the center, dividing East Berlin from West Berlin. East and West, the line is still there. And the other thing that's irrelevant to the story we presented, but there were two Holocaust analogies to this story. The first being that Wannsee, where the architects of the Holocaust first met to figure out how to kill 6 million Jews and maybe more. And then the other thing was that Donovan himself, along with John Ford, the great director, and George Stevens, the great director, they made a documentary, the three of them, that James Donovan was one of the producers of, and he was the legal supervisor of this entire documentary, where they presented visual evidence of 11 death camps and showed it at the trials, at the Nuremberg war crime trials. And pretty much that's all she wrote for the defendants.
He shows up in these amazing, he's like Zelig, shows up in these amazing moments in history when you're sort of not expecting someone like that there. That's incredible.
We have a slight mention when the head of the Bar Association meets with Waters and Donovan to ask him if he would do this job, but it's just mentioned that he was a prosecutor at Nuremberg.
Steven, to wrap up, you have an amazing story about how when you were a teenager and your father was in line in the Soviet Union, correct? Let's talk about that a little bit.
Well, my dad was never a communist. And, but my dad was a very brave man like Donovan. And I think in 1960, General Electric, where my dad worked, where we lived in Phoenix, Arizona, asked for volunteers, 5 project managers and electrical engineers, to travel to Moscow on a 3-week foreign exchange. So 5 Soviet engineers would come to Arizona, and my dad and 4 others would go to Moscow, and it was all on a voluntary basis. And my dad volunteered to do it. I got very upset, and so did my sisters. And my mom got really upset because we thought he was going to never get out from behind the Iron Curtain. But he just kept saying to me, the problem is we're always talking about dropping nuclear bombs on each other's countries, and people just aren't talking anymore. We need to have a conversation. We need to talk. Talking solves all problems. And my dad went over there on principle. And when he got over there, Gary Powers had been shot down about a month before, and the Russians had put all of the pieces of the U-2 on display in a building, including the helmet Gary wore and the flight suit. And my dad stood in a long line. Everything in Russia in those days was a long line. Lenin's tomb was 3 hours. This was like an hour and a half to go see the pieces of the remains of the U-2. My dad was in the back of the line, and a military man approached him with some plainclothes people behind and asked to see their passports, and that's always scary. And they had to actually offer their passports. And while this military man had the 5 passports in his hand, he crooked a finger and said, "Follow me." My dad speaks some Russian. And they all went to the front of the line and got cuts, really, and got to see the U-2 in front of all those other Russians who were really pissed off because these Americans were getting cuts. But when they got to their wreckage, the colonel or the officer got really upset and started shaking his fist, and he pointed at the U-2 and he yelled in English, "Look what your country is doing to us." He said that like 3 times. "Look what your country is doing to us." And I said to my dad, I said, "Were you terrified of, what were you thinking?" My dad said, "Well, I was watching his hand with the passports in them. I just kept watching the passports until we got them back." So my dad took all these pictures, and I had never seen the pictures as a child. My dad took pictures of So when I gave my dad Matt's script and told him, he's almost 99 years old, he's in great shape, and I told him, you know, what the movie I'm making next. I said, will you read the script? So my dad read the script, and after he finished reading the script, which he really liked a lot, he said, oh, you got to see these pictures. Did I ever show you these to you, Steve? And he pulls them to the drawer, and he brings out these Kodachrome slides, you know, the kind you put in the slide projector. And there were these 4 shots of the U-tube and the flight suit and the helmet, which I had not seen until I got involved in your script.
Wow.